Hello everyone, I'm continuing with the discussion of morality for two reasons. Secondly, because I can't count. Whatever, my previous videos on the subject have dealt with the question of morality from the point of view of a simulated universe and, by extension, from a universe where we try to assume God doesn't exist. So it's only fitting that I at least examine how morality comes about from within a theistic framework. But this is where things can get a little complicated. While it's relatively easy to make arguments for theism in general, the reality is that those arguments are not sufficient to narrow down to a specific deity. So to that end, there is no single way to interpret theistic arguments and come to a conclusion that everyone will accept. For that reason, I will simply talk about my own view. But for some groundwork, I should point out that in Christian theism, human beings are persons, but so too is the divine being. More specifically, in Trinitarianism, God is three persons and one being. The point here isn't to fully describe how that works. Indeed, most Christians say there is an element of mystery to the doctrine of the Trinity because God is the only being who exists in the form of God, and as such there is no valid comparison that we can use. Every attempted analogy commits some form or another of heresy. You may not like that, but let's honor that position and assert that, if Christianity is true, then God the Father can be viewed as a specific person, along with God the Son and God the Spirit, each being separate, but co-equal in divinity, persons. The reason I bring this up is because the first thing I would ask a skeptic of theism to do is to answer the question of whether they believe that there are any moral duties that human beings are obligated to perform, or obligated to refrain from performing. If a skeptic does not believe in moral obligations, then this video is not going to do much for you. However, I have often been told by atheists that moral duties can be constructed without the need of referencing God at all, and therefore that would certainly imply that human beings are under moral obligations irrespective of the existence of God. If that is a position that you hold to, then I would ask you simply to consider this fact. If you, as a person, are able to grasp and hold on to moral duties and obligations, and those moral duties and obligations genuinely are duties and obligations, then if God exists as a person, why would he not be able to generate the same moral duties and obligations? Please note very carefully that I am not saying this is how God does it. I am pointing out only that if human beings can create objective moral standards without the existence of God, then by what reason would anyone be confused that God could do the same thing? As I mentioned in a previous video, I don't think it's possible to imagine a world where God does not exist because such a world would not be logically possible. But pretending for a moment that somehow logic magically springs into existence in a universe where there is no God, then the question is, what is the reason for which our morality actually becomes a moral imperative? Again, as I stated previously, nature does not provide us a moral blueprint. Rather, nature is red in tooth and claw. So where does the obligation of morality come from? Where is the oughtness found? Take the moral standard often applied by skeptics. We ought to maximize happiness for the greatest number of individuals while minimizing the suffering of the greatest number of individuals too. Let's accept that claim. The question remains, why ought we do so? You may argue, it logically makes the most sense. The greater the happiness and the less the suffering, the better off everyone will be. Okay, but why should I care about other people being better off? Perhaps you would respond, if other people are better off, then it will most likely mean that you are better off too. But this clearly isn't the case in our universe, where often we have to sacrifice our own happiness. Indeed, sometimes we have to sacrifice our own lives so that others can be better off. What benefit is there to me if I die so that others may live? Also, that brings to mind the fact that if I only help my neighbor because I hope by doing so I will increase my own happiness, is that actually a morally praiseworthy action? But that's a bit of a side trail. Back to the main point. Where does the moral compulsion come which requires me to engage in certain behaviors or refrain from engaging in those behaviors should I wish to enact them? More to the point, what if I decide that it would help more people if I took all your money and spent it on behalf of all others than you spending your own money selfishly? What if I were to decide that having a permanent class of slaves who are forced to endure 99% of the work that no one else wants to do would free up enough people to outweigh the pain inflicted on those slaves? Do those positions still seem like they would be moral? I hope that we would all agree that it would be immoral to implement these decisions. But why? I mean, yes, it feels wrong, but is that enough? Excluding sociopaths, all of us have engaged in behaviors that we personally believe are evil, yet we did them anyway, and we feel guilt for having done them. But why do we feel that subjective experience of guilt, which is clearly not a pleasant feeling, when clearly it would increase our happiness if we never felt it? I maintain that we feel guilt because we did that which we thought was wrong. Set aside for a moment the fact that different people think different things are wrong. After all, clearly not everyone thinks that certain actions are wrong, but we do have that feeling that some actions definitely are wrong in our own mind. And therefore, to violate that sense of morality does result in guilt, which is a genuinely bad feeling that decreases our happiness. It makes us feel ashamed for not having lived up to our own standards. It is, in fact, This sense of shame which gives the weight of force to moral claims. Sociopaths don't care about morality. Psychologically healthy people, on the other hand, do care, because they feel the weight of that guilt. They don't know why they feel it. In fact, nearly all of us have changed our views on what constitutes some bits of morality over the course of our lives. But even if we now firmly believe a specific action is not illicit to do, we may still yet feel that sense of guilt if we engage in that behavior. But more than that, we feel empathy too. When we imagine a horrific crime committed against us, we can envision the pain we would have endured, and we imagine the guilt we would have felt if we had forced that on another person. Then the fact that someone else was able to engage in that behavior without feeling any sense of guilt at all may very well drive us to rage. For example, when a predator assaults a young child, most people will feel horrible for the child while simultaneously desiring the predator to get what he deserves, because we have that strong of a response to it. But think of this, the very fact that the predator had no qualms to engaging in the action already shows that he has a different view of morality than you do. Yet you will feel that righteous indignation against the predator and will righteously inflict punishment upon that predator, whether it be to confine him for some length of time, denying him his freedom, whether it be some form of corporal or even capital punishment. At issue is simply this: you subjectively feel that punishment is deserved, and it doesn't matter to you whether his view of morality says there is no problem with the behavior or not. Now, why do I bring all that up? Because this can work as an analogy with how God enforces his moral standards. It's not a perfect analogy, but look at the parts that are relevant. God thinks that a specific action is evil, but suppose you don't think it is. Why should you be punished just because God thinks it is? That is the same argument you would reject if a child predator made it. If your morality disagrees with God, then God is going to conclude that your moral compass is broken, just as you conclude the moral compass of the predator is dysfunctional. So this gets us to the final conclusion. You are sure beyond all doubt, you don't just believe, it is internal, deep in your bones, a part of your nature, that certain behaviors just are wrong. You don't know how you know they are just intrinsic to your very being. What if you were a perfect divine person who was incapable of violating your own moral code of conduct, so you never felt guilt since you never violated those principles, but who was capable of feeling the same things when you saw other people violate those core tenets that you know deep inside, fundamental to your own being? Would you not be angry with those who inflict evil actions on others, even if they delude themselves into thinking it's not evil? Would you not also have the ability to feel compassion and empathy? If God is a person, then why is it difficult to see that his very nature, those attributes that make him who he is the very thing that causes him to pass judgment on certain behaviors? His nature drives him to hold certain duties and obligations, which also grant to him the ability to forgive and reconcile. That, in my mind, is where the ultimate source of morality springs. God commands us to do that which we are obligated to do, so in that sense I am a divine command theorist. But God's commands are not arbitrary. They will not change on a whim, because they are grounded in his very being. He holds dear what he holds dear because that is what makes him who he is. And in the end, I hold that the reason why you feel the reaction you do toward evil, including the guilt you feel at your own moral failings, is a reflection of the fact that humans were formed in the image of God. God wrote his law on our hearts. Sin and evil corrupts and mars that image, but does not erase it. We fight against sin because it has been designed into our ontology, and it is part of our ontology because moral goodness is part of God's ontology too. And with that, I hope you have a blessed day.